Turning now to South Carolina for another case that we're following closely here at Court TV. A bond hearing got underway yesterday for suspect Kendall Mims. She's one of 3 people charged in the death of 20-year-old Jessica Barnes earlier this year. Joining me now in studio with all the latest is Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson.
Michael, good evening. This is a shocking case out of South Carolina involving multiple wives, a secret love child, and a burned body. And now one of the wives wants out of jail.
Judge, I don't know how we got here today. And I want you also to know that Kendall is heartbroken over the loss of Jessica. Even though it was a weird, strange dynamic, she loved her like a sister. Kendall did what she had to do to keep her baby alive, to keep herself alive, and to keep her grandfather alive.
Kendall Mims, Victoria Tippett, and Brandon Barnes are all charged in connection of the murder with Jessica Barnes. Police say the victim was strangled to death by her husband back in August. Her remains were later found weeks after searching for her.
There's 3 total co-defendants. They took the body down to a location near Lake Hartwell, and they disposed of the body by burning the body in a plastic tote. Miss Mims served as a lookout during the burning of the body, and she also was just intimately involved in the process of getting rid of the body.
Now Mims' defense team is claiming that she was a victim of emotional and sexual abuse. Her family making this emotional plea to the judge. Take a listen.
My sweet daughter was also a victim who happened to survive this monster, his path of destruction. He was abused and tortured in every possible way, just trying to survive. She had to fight for not only her life, but her precious child's life.
Kendall, a quiet, naive spirit, introverted, and finding it hard to speak up for herself, became a victim of a narcissist sociopath who deceived her, came into our home and stole her away as he has done to so many others. Please have mercy and let our girl come home from this tragedy. Thank you.
Just part of the powerful emotional statement to the judge made by Mims' family. The victim's family was also in court for this hearing yesterday, this hearing that we're about to watch, Michael.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. Truly appreciate it, as always. All right, folks, now we're going to follow that hearing from the beginning in South Carolina. We learned the case started off as a missing persons report, so let's get into that courtroom.
October 1st, Miss Mims was charged with obstruction and misprision of a felony and obstruction and accessory after the fact. Brandon Barnes is her co-defendant, is charged with murder. Miss Mims' involvement is after the murder took place, Miss Mims assisted with disposing of the body and concealing that the crime had taken place. There's 3 total co-defendants. They took the body down to a location near Lake Hartwell, and they disposed of the body by burning the body in a plastic tote. Miss Mims served as a lookout during the burning of the body, and she also was just intimately involved in the process of getting rid of the body. So that's our factors as to danger to the community. As to flight risk, during the investigation, during the missing persons investigation, Mrs. Mims, Mr. Barnes, and the 3rd co-defendant, Victoria Tippett, they took off from South Carolina all the way out to Colorado, and they were out in Colorado debating whether they should try and flee law enforcement. They ultimately decided to return to South Carolina. Also, as to flight risk, on the night of the incident, Miss Mims and her co-defendants were down in Georgia, presumably, according to law enforcement, looking for a place to dispose of the body, even though it ultimately was disposed of in Pickens County. And the last prong to flight risk is that Miss Mims' family is from North Carolina, so she's got out-of-state contacts in North Carolina. And she also has a history with Mr. Barnes, the defendant charged with murder. She has a history of basically up and leaving her family and losing all contact with them. which we think is concerning to flight risk. And if I could go back to danger to the community one time, Your Honor. She also has a small child. I believe Ms. Wise said that the child was 9 months old, currently is 9 months old. The small child was present at the time of the murder, and the small child was allowed by Ms. Mims to continue to live with Mr. Barnes for weeks after the murder, which we thought was an extreme danger to that child. So, Judge, that's why the state would oppose bond this time.
Is there a representative of the victim's family who wishes to address the court?
Yes, Your Honor. The victims are present, and law enforcement from the Pendleton Police Department are present. But
did you hear anything the state wants to present on the alternative to Ms. Wise?
They're just present. They do not want to present. They don't want to speak to the court.
All right. Ms. Wise.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Standing in front of you is Ms. Kendall Mims. Your Honor, her family is present in the courtroom, and at the appropriate time, her mother, father, and grandfather would like to address this court. Judge, Kendall is 20 years old. She is the mother to a 9-month-old baby. She is a sweet, gentle, kind young lady. I know you've just heard terrible, terrible things about her. But that is not an indication at all of her real character. She is a loving mother, and she fell victim to Brandon Barnes, as did so many other women. Judge, he has a history of domestic violence. There are other women who were able to flee and get away from him. Unfortunately, Kendall and Jessica were not that lucky. Kendall is quiet. She's used to not being the center of attention. And she met Brandon online right at 2 years ago. He love-bombed her. He told her she was beautiful, that she was the most perfect thing in the world, that no one understood him the way that she did. He gave her attention. He showered her with affection. And she fell for it hook, line, and sinker, Judge. She did. She absolutely did. However, when she did leave North Carolina to go live with Brandon in Georgia, things took a turn for the worse. He assaulted her for the first time. And then, of course, he came back to her and said it would never happen again, that he couldn't live without her. Please don't leave him. Once again, she fell for his lies and his deception. Soon thereafter, she became pregnant. And when that happened, she was trapped. She thought that staying with Brandon would provide a stable home for their child. She was raised to think two parents needed to be in the home. And even though it wasn't perfect, she was trying hard to make it for her daughter. She eventually ended up in a pool house that was restructured into basically a small apartment, maybe about 400 square feet, where her grandfather lived in Pendleton. Judge, Brandon destroyed the inside of the pool house. He killed several animals and would tell Kendall that...
So Kendall Mims is charged as an accessory after the fact. She's seeking bond to get out of jail while she awaits trial. Two considerations for the court: risk to the community and risk of flight. That's what the court has to consider. All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue to listen to more of that hearing for one of the defendants in the secret lover murder plot in South Carolina. So keep it here on Court TV, your front row seat for justice.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, a ghost gun and a manifesto found with the suspect in the United Healthcare CEO shooting. We're unpacking everything we've learned from this investigation.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV. This week,
join us each morning to get trial ready for the day's proceedings. Plus, a closer look at true crime cases with a voice for victims.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Weekday mornings at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
All right, folks, we're going to get you back to that bond hearing in just a moment. But first, let's bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us is former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, great to see you. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me on the program. And I want to pick your brain as a former prosecutor and call on that experience, because my question is, and I want to go back to the original charging decision. Some of the facts of this case are that, in fact, she did not witness the killing. She was involved in this sort of, love triangle. She had a child with him, so that kind of stuck her to the situation. She seemed like a victim, or at least the claim by the defense. She was a victim of self-defense. She did ultimately help get rid of the body. Is it always form to charge someone like that for their involvement in a case, considering some of the facts in this case? Or do you look deeper and try to find ways to connect them to the crime that they, I guess, had some intent to commit it?
Well, it's a question of whether you charge them, but ultimately, here's someone that you want to cooperate against the murderer, right? So sometimes you'll bring them in and maybe see how much information they provide, but ultimately, they are a recipient witness to this body being burned. So it is a crime. It is accessory after the fact to murder. It's misprision of a felony, which is essentially covering up a felony. So there's someone who's guilty of a felony. Now, of course, is she the primary target of the prosecution or the investigation? Absolutely not. But here's someone you want to lean on. You want to make sure they flip against their lover.
All right, so you have all that. Let's say she agrees to testify. The trial's coming up. She wants bond. Now, I know generally what the bond considerations are: risk to the community, risk of flight. As a prosecutor, what are you arguing against someone like this, a young lady with a child by, I guess, the main defendant in this case, young girl, probably under his thumb on some level? How are you arguing against her getting freedom in this case?
How am I arguing, or why am I arguing? I think the why is because, why probably because she hasn't flipped yet. And I mean, the practical reality is prosecutors like people in custody. Doesn't matter whether it's Diddy, doesn't matter whether it's this young woman, because you have a lot more leverage over them. It's much easier to get a plea out of someone who's in custody or cooperation, which is what they want here. Now, as far as the law is concerned, like you said, Michael, really the standard for bail is someone who's not a risk of flight or a danger to the community. So sometimes, and I'm not saying this prosecutor, sometimes prosecutors argue for no bail because it does give you more leverage over someone that you're trying to get a plea deal signed or cooperation out of.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's not a factor whether she's agreeing to testify for the prosecution. But that may play into the factor that you will argue that she needs to be kept in jail. Totally get it. All right, stand by, Nima. We're going to go back to court now. In that South Carolina courtroom where a young mother is facing charges in a love triangle turned deadly, Kendall Mims is hoping to get pre-trial release. So again, let's get back in there and listen in.
The cat choked itself on a hair tie. And, I was moving the couch and I didn't realize the cat was in it. Kendall isn't capable of these kinds of things. And so she never imagined that the father of her child would be as well. The physical abuse included hitting, pushing, strangling several times. He sexually abused her. He forced those women, Jessica included, to perform sex acts on him and together. She was humiliated. She was belittled. She was tortured. Because he kept telling her that if she left, if she said a word, he was going to kill her daughter. He threatened to kill her grandfather. He threatened to kill her family members, and he threatened to kill her repeatedly. When she was 4 weeks postpartum, he told her she had to go back to work. She worked 2 jobs 4 weeks after giving birth. He wouldn't allow her to breastfeed. Instead, he wanted the victim of this case to breastfeed their child. He took her money from her. He used her credit cards. He emptied many of her accounts. He destroyed everything that she had. He destroyed the relationship that she had with her family. Standing here in front of you right now is a shell of the young woman who she used to be. I don't even think she understands how much of a victim she is from Brandon. I also want you to know, Judge, I am the one who told her that Brandon admitted and confessed to killing Jessica. She did not know. They told her over and over again, Miss Tippett and Barnes, she killed herself, she killed herself, she killed herself. He wouldn't allow her to have any contact with her grandfather, even though he lived like 100 feet away. He wouldn't allow her grandfather to have any contact with her child. He controlled every single thing she did. When he was working, he would make her go sit there so that he could keep an eye on her while he was at work. Judge, I don't know how we got here today. And I want you also to know that Kendall is heartbroken over the loss of Jessica. Even though it was a weird, strange dynamic, she loved her like a sister. Kendall did what she had to do to keep her baby alive, to keep herself alive, and to keep her grandfather alive. The people that she worked with spoke to the police. They told them that she would come to work with marks all over her. She was so scared of him. He wouldn't let her take the baby to work. That baby was with him unless she was there. She couldn't get away from him. Since she's been incarcerated, she has started experiencing stroke-like symptoms. She's lost the feeling in the right side of her body. She's doing a lot better today. But there's a tightening or a shortening of the carotid artery in her neck, which is indicative of a stroke. It could be caused by strangulation. I do have her medical records present with me today if you would like to see them. Judge, we ask that you would give her a bond. She needs to be home with her child. Her 81-year-old grandfather lives alone in Pendleton, and while he is a good man, he alone is responsible for taking care of a 9-month-old. Kendall desperately wants to get home to her baby so that she can bond with her and be the mother that that child deserves. At this time, Judge, her family would like to address the court.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to step aside here and take a break. But before we do, we have an update from Vermont, where court ended early today in the Van life and death murder trial. Joseph Ferlazzo is accused of fatally shooting and then dismembering his wife, Emily, while the two were up vacationing, celebrating their first anniversary. Emily's family reported her missing when he returned from their trip alone, claiming that Emily left after they got into an argument. However, during a police interrogation, Ferlazzo confessed to killing Emily and dismembering her body. He's charged with first-degree murder. Now, he has pleaded not guilty, and his attorney argues that his statements were not voluntary and that he shot his wife in self-defense. Now, before court ended today, the jury heard from a DNA analyst who testified that Emily's DNA was found on several items, including the defendant's knives.
You were also able to conclusively match to the saw blade, which was item A13.
Yes.
And then the reddish brown stain on the underside of the shower, which was item A14.
Yes.
And then 3 saw blades.
Knives.
Is that correct? We have
Knives.
oh, sorry, knives. A15.
Yes.
A16.
Yes.
And A17.
Yes.
Now, Now, the state's case is expected to wrap up tomorrow, and then we'll find out whether or not defendant Joseph Ferlazzo will take the stand in his own defense. His attorney promised it in openings, so I suspect he will. All right, we're going to step aside now for that quick break. We'll hear from the defendant's family in that hearing in South Carolina for the secret lover murder plot when we come back. So keep it here on your front row seat to justice. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala, back now to South Carolina for the case involving multiple wives, a secret love child, and a burned body. And now one of the wives wants out of jail. Kendall Mims, Brandon Barnes, and Victoria Tippett are all charged in connection to the murder of Jessica Barnes. Police say the victim was strangled to death by her husband back in August. Her remains were found weeks later. Well, now Mims' defense team is claiming that she's basically a victim of emotional and sexual abuse. Her family making this emotional plea to the judge, and we're going to hear from that in just a minute. But I want to get you back into court where her grandfather is going to be speaking.
What's happened to Jessica and others involved. One day I was passing the pool house and heard cussing and yelling.
While he was passing the pool house, he heard cussing and yelling. He looked to see what was going on. Brandon was directing his outrage at Kendall. I opened the door to tell Brandon he couldn't talk to my granddaughter that way. He stopped at the time, but a week or so later, he came out in the yard and he told me that I was lucky to be alive. Brandon would not allow us to visit with Kendall at all. In fact, when she came into the house, she had to have her phone on the entire time so that he could hear everything she was doing and everything that was being said. My wife's retirement picture from Redfern had been hanging in the bedroom for over 20 years. I noted it was missing and asked Brandon where he had put it. He said that he put it in the corner because the glass had busted out. He also busted out the 55-inch flat screen TV I had in the bedroom. I later found it behind a warehouse. The microwave was also busted up and behind the warehouse as well. There are also 4 doors that are damaged, and these are just a few examples of Brandon's explosive emotions, his lack of control, and his disrespect for others. He burned several holes in the carpet, saying that it was always an accident. Due to our mistrust of Brandon, when he asked me to help him get cars to go to work, I was fearful that he would take off with Kendall and her daughter. We might never see them again, so I had trackers installed on the cars. I also had Ring cameras on my house, and I told the police about the cameras and turned over all of that information to them. I assumed that helped them find Jessica. Brandon required Kendall to wear headphones so that he could hear everything she said. He also required Kendall, her daughter, and others to come sit at work so that he would have complete control over her. He also had control over the cash in the house. And in July, August, and September, Kendall earned over $5,700, deposited it into her account, and then he transferred it out, at least $5,000, to his own Apple account. I considered this financial abuse.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor. I am Teresa Mims, mother of Kendall Mims. As awful as the story is, and that we are so sorry that this tragedy ever took place, my sweet daughter was also a victim who happened to survive this monster, his path of destruction. Kendall is a surviving triplet who has been fighting for her life since she was born at 2 pounds and 8 ounces. I've already lost one child, and I honestly cannot and to lose my only daughter. Over the past year and a half, I have watched this monster, Brandon, love on my daughter and slowly slip away her life as if he had a noose around her neck. And pulling it so tightly until she was just a shell of a human. I watched my beautiful, loving, innocent, sweet-spoken daughter, who's never been in trouble in her life, transform her hopes and dreams of becoming a biomedical engineer to help design prosthetics for veterans to a shell of a person who was abused and tortured in every possible way, just trying to survive. She had to fight for not only her life, but her precious child's life, but also her granddaddy's, her brothers, Mom, and her dad. I knew from the very start that Brandon was pure poison, and we did everything in our power to keep him from taking her from our loving family. He was instead a thief who came to steal, kill, and destroy, because he did that. I saw him cut off her communication with family and friends, humiliate her, and demean her in every possible way. He even cut off her ability to have her EpiPen and antihistamines to help prevent her from going into possible anaphylaxis, since she had a chronic idiopathic urticaria diagnosis. He even had her catatonic like, where she could not sit on comfortable furniture, eat her favorite foods, or take warm showers, because she feared she would have to get used to his way of life again. He controlled her move in every way, including telling her she could not make any noises during childbirth. And he bragged about this fact.
All right, we're going to wrap up this hearing and have the judge's decision when we return. So keep it here on your front row seat to justice.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, a ghost gun and a manifesto found with the suspect in the United Healthcare CEO shooting. We're unpacking everything we've learned from this investigation.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on Court TV. Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, tonight, 9, 8 Central, only on Court TV. Tab 2.
All right, just a moment, we're going to wrap up this hearing for you. But first, I want to bring in our guest, still with us, Nima Rahmani. He's a former federal prosecutor, of course. Nima, I just wanted to ask you about some of the arguments being made by the defense. They really focused in on the facts of the case, or what they believe is a lack of evidence that she did anything wrong. And although that's not a particular consideration for this court, in some jurisdictions it is, but it does play into the risk of flight and the risk to the community, does it not?
It does, but they should really be focusing on those two elements. Really, they're presenting a mitigation case, talking about how the defendants, they too were victims, but that's usually something that's appropriate for sentencing if someone accepts responsibility or getting into the facts. I think what the defendants should focus on is their ties to the community. The fact that they weren't involved in the underlying murder and how they might have been pressured to help cover it up, but as family members, we will do everything we can to ensure their appearance at trial. That's what the judge is looking for, not this sob story as to how they too were victims when we're really talking about a murder case here.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's get back into court now. Stand by, Nima. The rest of that bond hearing for Kendall Mims in the secret lover murder plot in South Carolina. We're going to listen now to the judge's decision.
Very complicated set of facts. There's obvious disagreement facts of the case. At this point, I'm going to deny bond. I find this is a danger to the community. I will allow this to be revisited in 90 days to give the attorneys time to get reports back so that you may be able to flesh the facts out. So that'd be the order at this time.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
Sir, Judge.
All right, so the judge denies bond. It was actually the second time that bond was denied for that young lady. Let's bring back in our guest still with us, Nima Rahmani. Really, no surprise there, not just based on the fact that, I agree with you, I thought some of the arguments presented by the defense were sort of a bit misguided for this particular hearing. But again, she was involved in a very, very serious crime.
Exactly, Michael, and I think at this point the defense needs to have a serious talk with their client about cooperation, because in these murder cases it can get very dicey. You push the case to trial, sometimes you get wrapped into it, and we don't know if the evidence is there, as a co-conspirator, as an accessory, as an accomplice, and all of a sudden you're on the hook for the substantive murder. I'm not saying we're going to end up there, but this is really a roll of the dice. You can gain a lot from cooperating. Oftentimes, again, if you're the prosecution, you want to pin the murder on the actual murderer or the person who's most at fault. So this is an opportunity for cooperation, but sometimes, and I've seen it time and time again, especially with these vulnerable female defendants, they're loyal to the murderer, loyal to a fault, but they really should be saving themselves at this point.
You know, she may not be cooperating at the moment, but there is another person involved. This is a love triangle, and the other person is testifying, and that person was much more involved in terms of they actually were witness to the killing itself and was involved in the cover-up, and they're charged as well. Do you really need both under these circumstances?
You don't need both if you're the prosecution, but of course you'd like to have both. Obviously, you want the more witnesses, the better. And it's even more reason for Mims to cooperate, because oftentimes the first person to cooperate gets the benefit of the cooperation because prosecutors need it the most. So now you're going to be stuck in a position where you're along for the ride. If you're this co-defendant, Mims, you're trying to get the case severed, of course. But the last thing you want to do is try it together with his murderer, with a third defendant cooperating against you both. Really tough case to defend. So I think Mims needs to really start thinking about cooperating sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Nima, quite frankly, the fact that she's reluctant to help out with the prosecution kind of plays into the argument that maybe she was more involved in this than they're claiming at this point. The fact that, I mean, if everything they said was true, I think she'd be jumping out of her shoes to testify against him.
Oh, potentially, yes. And that's why it's very risky and dangerous to go along for the ride. And here's someone that can easily be dirtied up at trial, because the jurors might think, well, she knows more than she's admitting to, and she's trying to minimize her role in all this. And like you said, there's a love triangle, and there's a third defendant who's implicating both of them. But it's interesting. I've seen it even as a prosecutor, and I handle more than 1,000 cases, put more than 1,000 defendants in prison. I did see a handful of cases where there were people, for emotional reasons, they refused to take the rational route and cooperate against someone who was a co-defendant. Maybe they were in a physical or sexual relationship with that person, and it can cause people to make bad decisions, because usually, and this is coming from a former prosecutor, when the deck gets stacked against you and there's really these potential serious charges, the rational route is to flip, to cooperate. That's what the vast majority of criminal defendants do. So hopefully she sees the light sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and again, she has a child with him. That could play into it. Who knows what her thinking is? She's a young lady. All that we heard from the defense in this hearing, a lot of that, obviously, they're going to try to get into trial. What effect will it have on her culpability for the crime if they start bringing in evidence that he was in fact controlling and he did all these different things that really we see women who are being abused have to deal with? And again, she's younger, and she was described as what? A couple of people she was quiet, naive, sweet, kind, and gentle.
I think that will have to be the defense in this case, and we've seen it. When you have these co-defendant cases, you got to point the finger at another co-defendant. It's going to be very hard for Mims to say that she had nothing to do with this at all. Again, when there's witness testimony that's going to put her at the scene when this body was murdered, obviously you got the motive because this is the ex-wife of the alleged murderer. So, you know, you will see this finger pointing, but the prosecution's job and what they're going to try to do is keep this case together, keep all the individuals involved, because sometimes it's hard for jurors to kind of slice it that thin. We're going to say, well, yeah, if you're there, you must have known something, right? You know, although the jury instructions say that this is an accessory after the fact, sometimes jurors, when they see a gruesome murder and a body that was burned like this, they're just inclined to throw the book at everyone and return guilty verdicts across the board. You know, you don't see split verdicts often in a case like this. That's why, unless there's some sort of severance motion that's granted, this is potentially going to end very badly for her.
Yeah, I would have to agree. A lot more to play out in this case. We'll be watching, of course, Nima.